climbing tree. Toto-chan's tree was large and slippery to climb, but if you climbed it skillfully, you could get to a fork about 6 feet from the ground. The fork was as comfortable as a hammock. Toto-chan used to go there during recess, and after school, she would sit and look up at the sky or watch people going by below. The children considered their trees their private property. So, if you wanted to climb someone else's tree, you had to ask permission very politely, saying, "Excuse me, may I come in?" One of Toto-chan's friends at school was Yasuaki-chan. He had had polio as a little child and had lost the use of a leg and a hand. Yasuaki-chan had never climbed a tree and so couldn't claim one as his own. That's why Toto-chan decided to invite him to her tree. They kept it a secret because they thought people were sure to make a fuss if they knew. When Toto-chan reached the school, she found Yasuaki-chan waiting by the flower beds. The grounds were deserted now that it was summer vacation. When Yasuaki-chan saw Toto-chan, he hurried towards her, dragging his leg and holding his arms out in front to steady himself. Toto-chan was thrilled to think they were going to do something secret, and she giggled. Yasuaki-chan giggled too. Toto-chan led Yasuaki-chan to her tree. Then she ran to the school shed, brought a ladder to the tree, and leaned it against the trunk. It reached the fork. She climbed up quickly. Holding the top of the ladder, she called down, "All right, try climbing up." Yasuaki-chan's arms and legs were so weak, he could not get even on the first rung without help. So Toto-chan hurried down the ladder backward. Then she tried pushing Yasuaki-chan up from behind. But Toto-chan was so small that it was all she could do to hold on to Yasuaki-chan, let alone keep the ladder steady. Yasuaki-chan took his foot off the bottom rung and stood beside the ladder, his head bowed. Toto-chan realized it was going to be more difficult than she had thought. What should she do? She wanted so badly to have Yasuaki-chan climb her tree, and he had been looking forward to it so much. She went around and faced him. He looked so disappointed that she puffed out her cheeks and made a funny face to cheer him up. "Wait, I've got an idea." She ran back to the shed and pulled out one thing after another to see if she could find something that would help. She finally discovered a stepladder. It would remain steady, so she wouldn't have to hold it. She dragged the stepladder over, amazed at her own strength, and was delighted to find that it almost reached the fork. "Now don't be afraid," she said in a big sisterly voice. "This isn't going to wobble." Yasuaki-chan looked nervously at the stepladder. Then he looked at Toto-chan drenched in perspiration. Yasuaki-chan was sweating heavily too. He looked up at the tree. He placed a foot on the first rung. Neither of the children knew how long it took Yasuaki-chan to reach the top of the stepladder. Toto-chan got underneath him and gave him support. Yasuaki-chan struggled with all his might and finally reached the top. Hooray! But from then, it was hopeless. Toto-chan jumped onto the fork. But no matter how she tried, she couldn't get Yasuaki-chan onto the tree from the stepladder. Toto-chan looked at Yasuaki-chan. She suddenly felt like crying. She had wanted so badly to invite Yasuaki-chan onto her tree and show him all sorts of things. But she didn't cry. She was afraid that if she did, Yasuaki-chan might start crying too. Instead, she took hold of his hand, with its fingers all stuck together because of the polio. It was bigger than hers, and his fingers were longer. She held his hand for a long time. Then she said, "Lie down and I'll try and pull you over." If any grown-ups had seen her standing on the fork of the tree, starting to pull Yasuaki-chan, who was lying on his stomach on the stepladder, onto the tree, they would have let out a scream. It must have looked terribly dangerous. But Yasuaki-chan trusted Toto-chan completely, and Toto-chan was risking her life for him. With her tiny hands clutching his, she pulled with all her might. At long last, the two stood face to face on the tree. Brushing her damp hair back, Toto-chan bowed politely and said, "Welcome to my tree." Yasuaki-chan leaned against the trunk. Smiling rather shyly, he said, "May I come in?" Yasuaki-chan was able to see a view he had never seen before. "So, this is what it's like to climb a tree," he said. The cicadas were singing, and the two children were so happy. They stayed on the tree for a long time and talked of all sorts of things. And for Yasuaki-chan, it was the first and last time he ever climbed a tree.